So let's just like dig right into this, Marc, because I mean, you're the expert on this subject matter. This is the area of law in which you specialize. When you saw this story, give me kind of like just your initial reaction to this whole thing.
Well, at first I was like, what's going on here? I need the backstory, right? Because I understand hospital blood draws and police, and I understand the benefits on each side. Like, hey, police need to get this evidence, but I understand there's also HIPAA laws to protect us as citizens. So I called some of my buddies in Utah that are DUI lawyers in Utah, and they gave me the backstory, Katie.
And what did they tell you? Well, let's start first with your impressions, because you had some initial impressions about this right out of the gate when you first saw the story.
Well, first, I know it's Utah and we're in Texas, you know, with the law, but the law is actually really similar in Utah. Like, you can't just go in. Okay, start at this. Getting into somebody's veins is like kicking down the door to their house. You're kicking down the door into their veins and their blood. And I guarantee you the information in my veins is a lot more private than even my underwear drawer at my house. You're not going to allow them to come kick down your door without a warrant. And they don't get to kick down the door in your arm and get into your blood without a warrant, right? And they can't get a warrant unless you're arrested. Or, so if they come to your house, they say, hey, we got a warrant, they can kick down your door. They didn't have a warrant here. So then police can knock and talk on your door and say, hey, we want to come in. And you can say, okay, I consent. But that didn't happen either because he was comatose. So what the police were trying to do here is get a citizen to go kick down your door without a warrant and search your body. And that's just not right. That's why we have the Constitution, the Fourth Amendment, to protect us against illegal search and seizures. They can't kick down the door to your house. They can't kick down the door to your arm to get into your blood vessels without a warrant or your permission or some exigent circumstance.
That's a really interesting analogy, that your veins are kind of similar to your front door, and that giving somebody permission or consent, as you said, to access the information that's in your blood is in no way different from giving someone consent to come into your house and search for something.
Absolutely. I mean, the kind of information, your DNA, what diseases, what medications, everything you have is all in your blood. I mean, there is very private information in your blood. It's a lot more private than what you keep in your house. I mean, your most valuable, trusted things in your house are in a safe or in a bank. The things in your blood are even more valuable than what's in your house or the bank.
Interesting. And there were a couple of things about the situation that you thought were legally problematic, especially when you spoke with your colleague in Utah.
Yeah, so the guy his name's Sergeant Jeff Payne, and he's from the United Police Department, which is essentially Salt Lake Police Department. Apparently, he's done a lot of these blood draws before, and more importantly, Katie, he is a licensed phlebotomist, which means he is licensed and could have taken the blood on his own. You want to know why he didn't take the blood on his own? Because he didn't have a warrant. And you can hear in the background of these videos the police saying, we don't have probable cause to arrest. We don't have probable cause to arrest. Like, he knew that he didn't have probable cause to make an arrest for DWI, and he knew that he couldn't just go draw a warrant. So he's trying to demand that this nurse go draw her blood. And the nurse did exactly what she was supposed to do, because she would have gotten fired for violating HIPAA, you know? And you can't give those people, these people's private information and just disclose it because a police officer says so. He needs to follow the rules, follow the law.
So in your expert legal opinion, you think that the officer was trying to empower someone else, or really force someone else to break the law on his behalf, because he knew that if he did so himself as a phlebotomist, that he would be breaking the law?
Let's call it what it is. He was trying to bully that nurse into getting the blood improperly. He was being a bully, trying to use his illegitimate power to bully her into kicking down the vein of that guy's arm and taking his blood. She absolutely could not do that legally. And she stood up, you know. And what's even more disturbing, this guy that they were trying to take his blood, he wasn't even the cause of the accident. He was the victim in the accident. He was the one hit. And another branch from like an hour away told this guy, Sergeant Payne, to go get this blood. And I guess he's no stranger. Apparently, rumor has it, he's no stranger to forcible blood draws. And he just went in there like a cowboy, like a bad cowboy, and tried to rob this guy of his blood, just kick down the door and take his blood. So that nurse was 100% justified.
Interesting. So obviously there's going to be an investigation. You know, we've heard that there now has been the announcement that there will be an investigation. So hopefully all of this will kind of come out in the wash, so to speak.
Yeah, I've been reading that she did not actually formally get arrested, even though he handcuffed her, drug her out of there. Internal Affairs by Salt Lake Police Department are conducting an investigation of this. The mayor's already apologized. Like, the entire town of Salt Lake knows this was completely inappropriate. But what's scary is how many times does this happen to citizens where we don't actually have the body camera? Thank God these guys had a body camera and we were able to see this. And the problem with these body cameras, these cops can shut it off at any time they want. Thank God they didn't shut it off. So it just goes to show you what can really happen out there, and oftentimes does in those hospitals.
What it also raises, Mark, is I think people don't know what their rights are, both if they were in the nurse's shoes or in the patient's shoes. If you're unconscious, to have your body violated in this manner without you, as you said, without your knowledge, without your consent, is against the law. You have constitutional rights there that if you were in this person's shoes would have been violated. On the other side of it, if you are working in a capacity as a medical professional, you have a law enforcement officer, that can be really intimidating for somebody. And I think most people have this presumption that if you're given an order by a police officer, you're supposed to follow it. We tell people that all the time when we're talking about police violence and interactions with police. We say, hey, listen, if you are, you come into contact with a police officer, follow that person's commands so that you remain safe. We say that all the time on television. This is a very different set of instructions, right?
Right. No, it took a very, very strong nurse. And I think it goes to show her character. And I've been reading about her that she's an Olympic competitor. She's a world, so she has drive. She has determination. She has commitment. And in this case, it took a strong nurse to actually stand up to this bully. And she did exactly what she was supposed to do because she was right. But I can totally see how in any, and a lot of these nurses want to help the police. We're taught that we want to help and respect the police. So I know it's got to be a dangerous or a fine line that they cross. But honestly, these police officers know better. They know either you need consent. Well, either they need consent, a warrant, or an exigent circumstance. Unfortunately, I wanted to tell you just this quick. In Texas, I think Florida is the same way because y'all just had Tiger Woods. And in Utah, even if driving is a privilege, it's not a right associated with the Constitution. So when you get your driver's license, you impliedly consent to give your blood. That means if you're in a coma and you don't expressly refuse to give your blood, you're already deemed to have consented, right? But
you're in a car.
Implied consent only applies if you've been arrested. And here, this guy was never arrested. He didn't even have cause to get arrested. So when you're arrested and in a coma, they can take your blood. But this guy, all the officers knew they didn't have probable cause to arrest him for DWI. They were just kind of going fishing. They wanted to go fishing in his blood for what was in there. And mind you, this a couple hours after he's been treated, who knows what kind of medication they were in,
Yeah, you mentioned that you said he was a victim in this accident. And so under those circumstances, as we know, when we've seen, unfortunately, those of us who are in journalism, we've seen crime scenes, we've seen what happens. They give patients a number of different things. They're trying to revive them or keep them alive. And those things, I would presume, and you would know more about this than me, but those things could influence the results of a blood draw, correct?
Right. I mean, let's just say hypothetically, he had alcohol in his system. Well, then if they're putting all these lactate ringers, which is just this liquid in the system, and they test his blood using enzymatic assay blood testing, that simple solution of lactate ringers is going to appear that he has more alcohol than normal. It's going to be falsely elevated. But
wow.
What happens if they gave him like morphine or something to settle him down or ease the pain, and then a police officer says, oh, he's got alcohol, even though it's under the legal limit, hypothetically, I don't know, and he's got morphine. And then they're going to go, see, he was driving on alcohol and morphine. You're like, dude, or what happens if he had a prescription for hydrocodone, they gave him more hydrocodone, and then they doubled the dosage? And I mean, there's way too much that can happen.
Sure. And if somebody is in trauma, a lot of times the body's response is to be combative. You see this with patients all the time. Sometimes they give patients things like Haldol. That's not an unheard of circumstance. So all of those things that you're laying out could unfairly position this person to appear that they've ingested something that they didn't voluntarily ingest.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it can be, as I told you, not even medication or drugs. It can be as simple as those lactate ringers, because there's an article that I wrote on, depending on how the testing they use, that NAD and the lactate ringers can react, and then you get this byproduct, which they think is alcohol, is all the ADH from alcohol, and all it is trauma and lactic acid being released in your body, trying to, you know, and the lactate ringers they're giving. I mean, there is so many ways to contaminate a medical testing. You know, it's scary if they would have gotten this blood and then tried to charge him with the crime when he was absolutely innocent. We don't know anything about this guy. What we do know is, though, they didn't have any probable cause to even assume that he was intoxicated or arrest him and charge him with driving while intoxicated or driving under the influence.
You know, that's very scary. Does this case sound like other cases that you've looked at that involve something called official oppression? Would that be your legal conclusion about this?
Yeah, you definitely have some of that. And what's scary is that we'll get a lot of blood tests. You know, we get the videos of the blood testing down at the police station, but when they go to the hospital, there are no cameras, you know, and or it's too late to subpoena the cameras from around the emergency room. Or we don't get to see a lot of this that happens back. Like, I just had a trial last week in Lubbock where they drew the blood in the holding tank, like the police holding tank of a hospital. They don't let us go back there. There are no videos. There are no body cameras. I have no idea what she's cleaning the site with. I have no idea if they're rubbing ethanol on it. I don't know if they're contaminating. I don't know if it's a sanitary place. I don't know if they're shaking the tubes, or, you know, you never know what they're doing. So it was refreshing to actually see this body camera, but, you know, you live and die by that sword. You're going to have, you know, good things and bad things come out of those body cameras. And this was a terrible thing for the police department, and a great thing for the people of Utah. And thankfully, this nurse isn't arrested and charged because the truth came out through these body cameras.
Well, it sounds like she did the right thing, both legally and in this case, ethically, on behalf of her patient, because once you're in the care of somebody, that person is your patient, and you have quite a bit of control over that person's liberty. You have a lot of control over what's done to that person. You have control over that person's privacy. And that's really frightening when you don't have the ability to say that you give consent to this person to have control over all of those things. That, you know, quite frankly, if you're walking around and talking and you're conscious, that you would be able to stand up and say, I don't give consent for this, but you've surrendered that to a medical professional. That's a sacred relationship and a sacred responsibility that woman had with her patient.
Right, because at the end of the day, these are nurses and doctors. They're not supposed to be on the team of the police. They're there for their patients, to protect the patient. You know, all too often you actually see nurses who think they're part of the police force and out there preventing drunk driving. And I'm like, that's not your job. You're supposed to be independent. We just need good medical procedure. You shouldn't be in cahoots with the police. So I'm glad that she stood up. She absolutely did the right thing and the ethical thing.
You know, for people who don't know, Marc, you were a part of a story that we covered many years ago in Houston involving these blood alcohol testing bans that at the time when they came out seemed like a good idea to the average person. But in fact, there were a lot of problems with them, and there were a lot of problems with the science, I say in quotes, behind them, and the control or lack thereof of the conditions that were used when people's blood was being tested.
Yeah. I mean, there's still problems with the science, and I think that we're always going to have problems because currently what we have in most jurisdictions are police labs running these machines. And when you get police labs, you're in bed with the police department. And I just had a guy said, out of 36 years and 10,000 vials, tens of thousands of vials, how many times have you made a mistake? He said, never. And I'm used to hearing that. These police labs never make a mistake. And I say, if NASA can make a mistake and they got the best scientists in the world with unlimited funding, and they make mistakes, how are police labs not? So this is a recurring theme that I'm seeing across the nation. You have police labs that are just in bed with the police department that are afraid to admit they made a mistake, but real science does make mistakes. And I think that's why I don't think any of this is going to change until we get true independent labs and independent lab testing.
You know, you're not the first person, prosecutor or defense attorney, who has suggested that independent labs could solve this problem. For a long period of time in Houston, they had to send everything outside because the Houston DNA crime lab was actually shut down because of the number of problems that they had and the results that were coming out of there that were actually found to be completely unreliable. So we know that there's a history of that in the fourth largest city in the country. And certainly that could be the case in Salt Lake City, Utah, or here in the Tampa, St. Petersburg area.
Yeah.
Marc, is there any bit of legal advice or a legal tip that you wanted to give to our viewers who are really interested in this subject?
I would just say, as a nurse, keep doing your job, abide by the HIPAA laws, and just do good quality nurse work. It's not about being bullied by these police. We will protect you. We, the criminal defense lawyers, stand up for the people, and those include the nurses and doctors that are standing. Will protect you from the police. We, as criminal defense lawyers, police the police, and we got to make sure that we place checks on these guys, not to go in and overstep their bounds and do this kind of stuff. So just keep doing good quality medicine, protect the patients. That's where the Hippocratic Oath and your HIPAA regulations, all that goes toward, protecting the patient. None of it ever was intended to protect the police and do whatever the police say. But by all means, be professional. She was completely professional, called her supervisor, she didn't fight back. She was polite, had her supervisor, and just be strong. Don't get bullied around by these people, by these police officers.
Yeah, rule number one for doctors is do no harm. And I think that she felt that was really her obligation to this patient, not to harm him in any way, both legally and physically.
Yeah, because this isn't kicking down the door. You're kicking it down with a needle. I don't think anybody likes being stuck with a needle. There is nothing fun, nothing pleasant about getting your blood drawn.
Well, without your knowledge or consent, especially. Yeah. I think that would have
completely violated.
Yeah, when the person awakened to find out what had happened, I think that would be a very frightening feeling. And I think one in that person's situation, I could imagine, would feel violated. Do you think this nurse will have some kind of, I know you're not a civil litigator, but will have a case against this officer or the department, perhaps?
I think absolutely. It's going to cause a rift over there. And the mayor and the police chief are already apologizing to her. But I don't know, because I don't practice too much civil. You're going to have to look at the economic damages, because what are her damages? Does she suffer from PTSD? Does she, because she wasn't actually arrested. There's no monetary loss, but what about her name being spread? She used to be an Olympic, contender, and now every time you Google her name, it's going to be being assaulted by the police. Did they disparage her good name? There's a variety of actions. We'll see. I'm sure the police will settle out of court with her.
In terms of this person who was injured in this car accident, we know now that this person was the passenger, was not responsible for the accident. Is there anything that will happen with respect to that person that you see going forward?
I don't think they violated him, but that's even more ridiculous, because the passenger cannot get a DWI. They weren't operating the vehicle.
Right.
They were, yeah. So I that's even more ridiculous. I thought, because I think it's still coming out, because I've heard that this police officer was chasing the suspect who ran into this victim. So I still think there are reports coming out. But certainly if he's the passenger, what are you going to get him for? Public intoxication? Well, at public intoxication, he would have had to been a danger to himself or others. I don't think he was a danger to anybody. He was comatose, I think the police really just overstepped their bounds and were trying to go fishing in his arm to see if they could. It's just overzealous police work, and at the end of the day, see if they could make a case out of nothing.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your perspective, and we should definitely follow up with you, Marc. I know there are going to be a lot of comments that I'm going to go back and read and get some people's questions, and if you don't mind, I'll follow up with you and let you know what our viewers wanted to ask you, ask the expert, so to speak, because I think you had a lot of great questions. But I think the two things, if I had to just recap for people who may just be joining this, number one, you have to have a warrant to come into someone's house. You also have to have a warrant to come into someone's body, right?
Yep.
And number two, if you're not under arrest, what rights do you have then?
Well, then you're a normal citizen. You're allowed to enjoy your peace and freedom walking around America. If you're not under arrest, you're free to walk around and do as you please. They can't just come kick in your door and take your blood. They have to ask your consent. And you're allowed to tell a police officer, no, I didn't do anything wrong. No, I'm not giving you consent. This is America. This is why we live here. So I can walk down the street or be involved in a car crash and be free from illegal searches and seizures while I'm unconscious.
So the two things legally that applied to this unconscious person were, number one, there was no warrant, and number two, this person was not under arrest. And those are the two things that the law requires to draw some support, right? Yeah,
so if he's under arrest, you got to get a warrant. If they're not under arrest, they have to consent. And since he's not consenting and not under arrest, the police had no legal right to violate the Fourth Amendment protection against illegal search and seizures.
Perfect. Marc Thiessen, thank you so much from Houston, Texas. And by the way, our thoughts and prayers with all the people of Houston right now. I know you're going through a terrible time, and I know you and your family have been reaching out to your neighbors and your friends to help them. And, you know, we're all with you in this, and we certainly are feeling for you right now.
Thank you, Katie, and thanks, Florida. I appreciate y'all's love and support.